This episode is brought to you in part by Exoterra. If you're as passionate about reptiles and amphibians as I am, you know that quality matters. I use Exoterra products on all my reptile and amphibian enclosures, which is why I'm excited to be partnering with them. From naturalistic decor to innovative lighting and enclosures of all sizes, Exoterra has everything you need for your cold-blooded companions. Exoterra. Make your reptiles feel at home. This episode contains a paid sponsorship placement for True Chroma by Faunalux. Lighting reptiles isn't just about brightness or giving UVB, it's about illuminating the world that animals actually thrive in. Introducing True Chroma by Faunalux, a premium, revolutionary LED spotlight purpose-built for animals. Faunalux has worked with lighting experts and biologists to develop something totally new. Reptile Vision Technology, a bespoke single-source chip delivering high levels of visible light and proportional UVA1. That means your animals can get true full-color vision for the first time. Tried and tested by zoos, vets, and passionate keepers worldwide, True Chroma is now available at fauna-lux.com/expertidiot10 for 10% off your order today. True Chroma from Faunalux. Educated by nature. This episode is brought to you in part by Unlimited Exotic Pets. Every day is Veranda Day for Nick Lillis, and it shows. At Unlimited Exotic Pets, Nick produces high-quality monitor lizards with a deep commitment to ethical care practices and top-tier nutrition. These aren't just pets. They're responsibly bred, ethically raised animals. Whether you're looking for a new companion, starting a breeding project, or anything in between, Nick has you covered. Unlimited Exotic Pets, keeping and breeding quality without limitations. Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Okay, welcome to episode 78 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today we're joined by Abby, the curly-haired keeper, Paul Duren, and Dr. Justin Julander. And we're going to be talking about maternal incubation. And it's kind of something that I personally am on the fence about. I keep going back and forth where I think like, there's too many variables, and the I don't want to lose my first clutch or whatever, and then I go to the other end of the spectrum where I think it's just so cool to do it. So you've all had your experience with it, and you've got half a chapter devoted to it in the more complete carpet python, Justin.
Yeah, a little bit of information in there.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of information in there. I mean, I put down some fun facts. Females can raise clutch temperatures more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient, which is wild. The female may urinate on the clutch to raise humidity. I don't know if these are fun facts or just facts. We'll just say they're facts. Maternally incubated hatchlings are slightly larger. Dead, dried out eggs were free from mold, and it didn't spread, right? So it didn't so if one egg ended up being a dud, it wouldn't like kill the other eggs in the bunch. That kind of the consensus.
I mean, so I guess, I would hesitate to state all these as undisputable facts that happen
Yeah.
every time. It's
They were facts for you guys in your trials, right?
or during observations, limited observations that we made while preparing, for the writing the book and such. That was all done, in the first edition. And so I don't remember if we added any additional clutches or did any, further trials with maternal incubation for the second edition. But so, I guess I just want to put the disclaimer out there that, this is not, absolute facts or anything. It's just what we observed in a few clutches that we maternally incubated in preparation for the book. We also did similar maternal incubation trials and with different Antaresia species for the complete children's Python book, and had some interesting observations there, and some surprising things that kind of took me aback a bit when I saw the data. So with these, we bought these little Hobo. Hobo is the company, I think, or brand of the data loggers that were about the size of like an Antaresia egg. So you could just kind of, when you had to catch the female laying, and you could just kind of slip it in with the eggs, and then the female would coil around it with the data logger in the middle of the clutch. And then once the eggs hatched and she was done, you could pull the data logger out and then download all the data onto, it just would kick out the whole, 60 plus days of incubation or whatever, and kick that out into a data file. And then you could make graphs and charts and stuff. So that's what we did.
Did you guys observe some of the same things that you observed with the carpet pythons? Were the babies larger or were they smaller? Did you have a better success rate than you would with artificial incubation, or was there a big variation between Antaresia and Morelia?
Again, I think it's hard to make those like broad statements of this is how it is, like, was it better? Was it worse? We see examples in nature where females are maternally incubating their clutches. And there was an older paper by Shine and some colleagues from like 1985. And they looked at wild carpet pythons that were brooding clutches. And I think all but maybe one resulted in failure. Like the female abandoned the eggs because it got extra rainy, or, there was some retained eggs and the female wasn't doing great after that. So like these kind of things happen in nature too. So I don't think you can, on average, maybe like, and I think we've got pretty good artificial incubation techniques these days. It's kind of, it varies by collection and location and such, but so it's hard to say, this will work better every time, or, somebody might try it and go, it was a complete train wreck. You told me it was going to be better, that kind of thing. So I think, depending on the circumstances, comparing, some of these clutches that we looked at that were artificially incubated to some that were maternally incubated, you could see potentially a benefit from maternal incubation. Sometimes it's not very noticeable. So there wasn't a statistical difference between maternally and artificially incubated offspring. And there's also some papers that show there could be an improvement in certain characteristics. I don't think in one study they didn't see a difference in size, but they saw a difference in behavior, maybe. There's lots of different things that can be influenced by maternal versus artificial incubation. So I don't think there's maybe a strong case to say, everybody go out and maternally incubate instead of artificially incubate. There's also challenges with maternal incubation compared to the ease and kind of set it and forget it aspect of artificial incubation. So I just
Okay.
want to make it clear, we don't want to overstate what we
Yeah.
saw to be more broad sweeping than it is. I think that's sometimes a tendency in herpetoculture that we have to say, oh, I did this and it was better. So, and they didn't quantify it. They didn't statistically analyze it. And maybe their methods just got better over time. And so they say, well, I saw a difference. So that means this is a better thing. And then everybody takes that to be the gospel truth. And forever on, everybody says, oh, you have to do this because so-and-so did it back in the 80s and it was better, So I think that's sometimes the pitfall we fall into, and nobody wants to risk their baby pythons, and so they're not going to do experiments on their clutches because they need to sell those clutches to fund the next project or whatever. There's not a lot of experimentation, and I'm not suggesting that everybody should go out and do experiments with their babies, but we could find out a lot of cool information. But again, there is some risk. It's sometimes easier to follow the well-worn trodden path of, take away the eggs and artificially incubate them, because you probably know what's going to happen with that, but I don't know. Yeah. It's a very complex topic. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We have so many questions here that I really doubt we're going to be able to get to them all. Most of these kind of came from you, Paul. Paul, this, thanks for coming up with this idea. I think it'll be a fun episode. This was your baby that, as you said, you maternally incubated, and you grew this baby, and
I didn't eat
for
3 months.
So it'll be.
He said, "Hold off on the dad joke."
Yeah, some things just can't be contained.
They got to come out.
That's right.
All right, so we'll start working through these, and we'll just kind of go in order. We'll go Abby, Paul, Justin, and I mean we'll start with the most obvious question, which is what made you want to try maternal incubation? What made you do maternal incubation over artificial incubation?
That's such a good question. My rationalization for that was these animals have been around for millions and millions of years. If I can facilitate an environment that replicates where this animal would have naturally had their eggs in the first place, she's going to do it a heck of a lot better than I could ever hope to. So that was my rationalization. As was with Stella, the retic. So yeah, that was really as simple as it was. It's like, she's going to do a better job than that was my first clutch. I've never done artificial incubation, just full disclosure. I've only ever done MI. But yeah, she knew better than I did.
So you think it's kind of, as long as you give them as long as your husbandry's on point and you give them what they need, you think that they are going to be more successful with it than you would be?
Yes, that has been my experience so far.
Okay. And Paul?
Yeah, I'd say similar answer. I mean, one of the things I really enjoy about keeping the animals that I keep is trying to observe the most natural behaviors that I can elicit from them, and to give them the most natural, the most natural keeping and the most natural setup that I can possibly provide. And of course, it's a pale shadow of what they would experience in the wild. But it's all about trying to replicate that as much as possible, and allow them to express all those, as many natural behaviors as possible. So, and same. Abby's got more experience than I do. I still just have a tiny sample size. I have only ever bred one clutch of anything, clutch of scrub pythons, and I'm much more of a keeper than a breeder. I might breed these guys again, but I felt like if this is going to be something I'm only going to do a handful of times, then I want to do it the most rewarding way that what's going to be the most rewarding for me, and go along with my whole philosophy of how I'm trying to keep these guys.
Okay. So it just kind of fit in with your granola lifestyle.
Yeah.
All right, Justin. So Justin, I feel like I'm curious, like I want to get a little bit of background in with your answer of why you did it. Did you do it when you were writing books to test out the waters, or did you do it way early on in your experience as a keeper?
Yeah, I actually did it with the first clutch I got. So
oh, wow.
part of it was when I started out, I got a pair of children's pythons. I bought it directly from Dave and Tracy Barker. And, that was my first foray into python keeping. And, who doesn't want to see babies hatching out from the mother's coils? I just think that was really kind of a cool aspect of python reproduction. So that was kind of one of the driving factors. I wanted to see, babies emerging from the coils, that kind of thing. And it just is just kind of a cool thing. And so, and also honestly, a little bit of desperation. I had a Hovabator back in the day, which is those little wafer dial things. It was basically a styrofoam chest with a somewhat controllable temperature setting, and so I'd use that for some other things that I'd bred, some colubrid species, bearded dragons, that kind of thing. And it seemed like as I'd get more eggs and kind of stack them up in the Hovabator, I think I extended the Hovabator, like made it taller than it probably should have been. So then I had this huge variation in temperature. I don't think it was designed to be enlarged. And so I was having issues with my incubator as well. So it was kind of like I better just let the female take care of it, because she'll probably do a better job than I would. But that first clutch, I kind of screwed up a little bit. I got it too wet. And so the bottom layer of eggs died and the ones on top hatched. So I had a very reduced success rate with that, but also learned a lesson: don't get the eggs wet. And so that kind of set. And I guess kind of in the back of my mind, it's a little bit of a nerd thing. Like I want to see, get data, try to figure things out, look at the temperatures during incubation. So that's kind of. So the first time was, curiosity, desperation. Later on, still once in a while, a little desperation of now I have a big, freezer that I've converted into incubator. It's got a lot more room, but sometimes I run out of room in that one as well. And so I guess I've got another clutch. I'll just let the female take care of it. So, again, desperation comes in once in a while to play here. So, but yeah, that's kind of my answer. I guess it's multifaceted, curiosity, desperation, and just coolness of maternal incubation. So, and why deny a female, that's evolved over millions of years from doing what she's evolved to do? It's kind of cool, from like what Abby and Paul said.
Now, are there situations where you can pick between species, and is there a species that you prefer to let maternally incubate over another? Like if you had to choose?
Yeah, I don't like it with Aspidites. They're not great at wrapping their clutches usually. They kind of are hit and miss. I think I've had my blackhead female wrap her eggs well once, and that was this year. And usually she just kind of dumps and runs. The Womas are kind of, sometimes they'll wrap, sometimes they won't. So it's Aspidites are not great at that. And I don't know, there's some evidence or research to suggest that some python species in the wild will actually leave their eggs if the conditions are right. So water pythons in, the Northern Territory, where it's not going to get too cold, they don't really need to regulate the temperatures. If they find a suitable spot that has the correct temps and humidity, they may just leave the eggs and get an early start on the next reproductive season, getting their weight on to produce more eggs for the next year. So there was some evidence that that's actually a successful, just as successful as maternal incubation, I guess, is dumping the eggs if the conditions are right, getting a head start on the next season. So Some species might be evolved to do that, have that strategy of like, well, things are good. I can probably leave them now. They're fine. We haven't had any interruption. No goannas are trying to dig me up. So I'm going to leave the eggs and hopefully they'll hatch in another few weeks and get on with the next year.
I wonder if Aspidites, if they do that more in nature, do you think?
I wonder, because they spend a lot of time in burrows. I know Melissa Bruton did some research on womas in southwest Queensland and had a couple nests that she was or females on eggs that she was watching, and the females were wrapped nicely around the eggs and incubating them maternally as they should, Mm-hmm. And there was some flooding, and the female had to leave the eggs to save herself during the flood. So there is that aspect in nature that the female will sometimes self-preserved and leave the eggs. So they're not going to go down with the ship, as it were. They're going to leave the eggs and live to breed another day, and lay more eggs down the road. So not all, I kind of mentioned this before, that older paper tracked some carpet pythons. The couple females they were tracking left the eggs to fend for themselves. I don't know if it was maybe the researchers were peeking in there too often and disturbed them, or, there's a lot of things that could play there too, but it does look like, nature is brutal, and sometimes floods or extreme temperatures or other things just cause the females to take off and not wrap their eggs. So,
yeah,
Preston, I guess with the water pythons, do I remember correctly that the moms stayed with the eggs when it was sort of a middle, like when it was pretty good conditions, and they left the eggs when the conditions were either terrible or fantastic?
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's one aspect of this is the female can tell, is this going to be a good situation, or are the eggs going to, and sometimes they might sit and coil dead eggs. Who knows? There's probably examples of that as well. And in captivity, just because you're maternal incubating doesn't mean you're going to improve the eggs. And I think this is a really important part of this is python, once the eggs are laid, there has been a significant amount of development of the egg. And so like embryo stage, 40 out of 90, I can't remember the exact number there, but like they're fairly progressed in their development. And so we also need to consider maternal incubation within the female. Before she lays the eggs, we need to have conditions that are good for that female. Because I think a lot of times, and I have an example of this in my own keeping with my black-headed female. She was laying eggs in like March. And so that meant, 2 or 3 months before that, she was ovulating 60 days before she laid. And so, she needed to be having those suitable temperatures at least, 3 months before March. And that was during my cooling. So I wasn't really thinking about heating up any of the snakes. And also I wasn't getting the male in there soon enough. And so it's taken me a few years to go, okay, I got to backtrack. Okay, the male needs to come in this time. I need to bump up the heat in her enclosure at this time. And so over time, that's improved my results. And I'm still not quite there yet, and still not doing the best at hatching the eggs. I only got 1 egg to hatch this year out of like a clutch of 6. So I feel really bad. I'm failing her in that regard. She actually kind of wrapped them this year, but not the best. She was kind of pancaked over them rather than wrapping them in kind of a vase or a coil. So I decided to pull them, but it's all kind of complex in a lot of ways, especially for certain species that might be a little more challenging than others. And I probably could, if I was going to let an animal incubate their clutch, I'd probably try to control the conditions a little better, give them more stable nest box, with kind of a temperature controlled area there. Right, usually I'll have like a hot spot in the, with heat tape or something in the cage, or a light, and then they can find an area suitable in their cage, but that might not be the best place to be incubating eggs. It might not be within the nest box. I know Nick mentioned this a few times too, where when we were preparing the book, he'd said like he'd put a nest box where he thought it needed to be, and then the female would move the nest box and get in there, and then he'd move it back, and then the female would move it. So I think the, you know, kind of the moral there is that like the female kind of knows what she needs and where she wants to be, but not always. Like sometimes females make dumb choices. You know, they might lay their eggs in nature in the wrong place or in a bad place, and so it's not a perfect system by any means, but it's what's been used for millions of years. So, you know, it works well enough to keep them going.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading that. It was like the female moved the nest box around the cage like twice or something like that. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So what species have you done this with, Abby?
Just the retics. So when Paul said I have much more experience than him, I have exactly twice as much experience as him. I've had 2 in my clutches with 2 different females, both retics, both 50% super dwarf. So I do think that makes it easier to accomplish MI than if I had been working with mainland females, because they are, I mean, Stella's still 12 feet and 40 pounds. She's a hefty girl. But facilitating a nest box that lends enough space for her to feel secure while also allowing her to maneuver around the eggs, either when she's eating or as the eggs start getting ready to pip, so she doesn't squish anybody, is way easier to accomplish than with, you know, a female that's 18 plus feet long and 200 pounds, right? But yeah, that's the only species that I have done. And the other species that I own are boas. So
you got to let them maternally incubate.
You kind of have no choice, right?
So can I ask real quick, just how are you getting your retics to breed? Cause you did it 2 years in a row successfully, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you fasting them? Are you cooling them? And then how are you introducing them, and, you know, or are they just kind of doing this on their own?
So I'm a behavior junkie. So I really like observing behaviors and essentially choice-based behaviors. So kind of everything on their terms. So I do palpate the female throughout the season just to check and see when ovulation is happening. The most I've ever had to pair females with the males is twice. That's including like the initial intro, because I usually don't intro the males until the females are ovulating anyway, because the girls just, you know, they're like, boys, ick, gross, go away, unless they're ovulating. So it maintains the safety a little bit more of the animals involved. So yeah, my go-to the last 2 years I've paired was literally open up the enclosure of the female, open up the enclosure of the male. Like Stella and Aries did it like right in the middle of the room. They didn't care. Like if the timing is right, it doesn't seem to matter. They'll get right to it. And then same with April and the male that I paired with her. Like I literally had them together one time and they were locked. So it's just, I think I have a small number of animals that I spend a lot of time working with. So noticing behavior shifts, noticing like when that ovulation is happening has been really, really informative in terms of timing. So that's been really, I don't keep calendars in terms of ovulation. All of my girls they ovulate at different times. Like Stella didn't even ovulate this past season. She did MI 2 seasons ago. So I think she was just giving her body a kind of break because she lost, goodness gracious, about 2/3 of her body weight when she was on her race.
My gosh.
She went from 40 pounds to 17.
What?
So yeah. So she lost a lot of weight. She looked like a freaking scrub when she came off of that clutch. She was like, I was like, oh my gosh.
Are you comparing pre-lay weight to after incubation weight?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 40 pounds was with all the eggs?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She honestly didn't gain a lot of weight while she was incubating. She weighed 40 pounds right before I paired her. And then right before I just happened to catch her weight right before she laid, and she maintained around 40 pounds, even coming off of food. So yeah, she lost a lot of weight. So it's, again, kind of to touch on what Justin was saying, MI is not for everyone, because it's terrifying. You don't get an egg count. You can't take the mom, like, at least I don't pull the mom off to palpate to make sure there's nothing like stuck, like all the eggs got out. You just don't know. You don't get an egg count. You can get an egg estimate, but it's not going to be nearly as accurate as if you're doing artificial, right? Mom loses a lot of weight. Like, neither of my retic girls shed the entire time. They would go through at least 2 shed cycles without leaving the nest. So they looked like utter crap. And they're retics. So of course, when they're breathing, they have the stuck shed, so they sound horrible. So yeah, it's a lot. You gotta do a lot of meditation if you're going to do MI.
Wow.
Terrifying.
So what is Stella weigh like right now?
She's right around 40 right now. It took her.
That is so bananas.
Yeah, it took her about, I want to say, a good 6 months to get the weight back on. We don't power feed. I was actually hoping she wouldn't cycle this year, because I'm like, I don't want you to either partho out or get bound eggs or anything. So luckily she knew the drill. She was like, nah, we're not doing that this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there, how many babies or how many eggs did you get? Both with both clutches.
With Stella, my bigger girl, she laid 30, 24 of them hatched.
Very fecund.
23 of them hatched. My apologies. And then April, my smaller girl, she's right around 9 feet. She laid 16 and 14 of them hatched. She had one bad one and one dead egg when I cut it. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul, how about you? Well, I know what species you've done. But how many eggs did you get? And I'm kind of curious too. I want to get a little bit of the background on how you bred your scrubs and if it was something you were actually looking to do or if it just happened and what the background is with that. And then Justin will get to you and all your species.
Sure. So I got mine as adults, and they actually came to me in pretty good body condition, and they had been occasionally cohabbed over the course of their lives. They were imported together, so it's not known whether they're related or not. They all came in a batch that probably had 2 or 3 different clutches commingled when they were all imported. So, and the previous 2 keepers had kept, especially the Bobby, the mom, at a good body weight. In fact, I thought she was fat, but I've since learned that if I had been keeping her based on what I thought was good body condition, I would have been keeping her too skinny. So it was good that she came to me in the condition that she did. And they had locked multiple times over the years, different seasons, but they just she'd never become gravid before. So I don't know. There's no way for me to know if there was something that I did that specifically led to her becoming gravid, or if it was just now she was old enough at 7. I don't know why it didn't take before, and it did with me. And so she laid 15 eggs, and they all hatched. One of them had pretty severe defects, and so was euthanized at a couple weeks old. It would have died anyway, but made it easier at the vet. And I didn't get a weight on her until a couple of months after the babies had hatched, and they'd been separated, because she was super, super on point after the babies left. She was just like a dragon, right? So I was not trying to handle her, let alone try and get her out onto a scale or anything like that. But
Hmm.
I would guess she maybe lost a third of her body weight, something like that. Definitely not more than half. That's crazy.
Yeah,
I know, right?
April lost more of that third body weight,
Yeah.
like what Bobby did. Yeah, Stella's was bonkers, the amount that she lost.
Yeah. And so now it's been, I guess about 15, 16 months from when she laid, and and she's getting back up to her original, to her pre-lay weight, but she's not, I would say she's still not quite there, and she didn't cycle this year.
Hmm. Okay. All right, Justin, what species have you done MI with, and yeah, just I love hearing all these details about it, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of a list of species that I've done it with, and I lost some different records that I had, and so like I lost some information from some notes I was keeping on my phone when I transitioned to a new phone. So like I've lost a lot of records that way, and it's kind of frustrating. So as big as a nerd I am, I still neglect to write down things very well. But from my recollection, I know I've bred or maternally incubated children's pythons on a couple different trials. Stimson's pythons, pygmy pythons, jungle carpets, Centralian carpets. I think I did a Woma clutch in there once. But those are the ones. I may have done a coastal as well, but those are the ones that are coming to mind. So a few different, but mainly those three genera, I guess, mainly carpets and Antaresia. So yeah, I kind of want to go back to a little, talk a little bit about what Abby was talking about, with relative clutch mass, where, the egg weight compared to the female prelay weight, usually you'll have anything from like 30 to 60% of the female's weight will be that egg clutch. And using the weights that Abby gave, that would be about a 57% relative clutch mass. If it was just, the eggs weighed that, amount between the 40 and 17 pounds. So, it's not outside of the realm of reality, I guess. And, the females do need to recuperate that weight loss a little, at least to reproduce, in the next year. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and they had last name Flood. He's bred Bullen's pythons quite a few times. Scott Flood, and
Yeah.
He was talking about how when his female Bullen's would lay, they almost didn't need to really put back on any weight. Like they didn't, they weren't obviously thinner or, as far as their pre-breeding weight was concerned, they were kind of back where they needed to be to successfully reproduce. And I think he said he doesn't really cycle feed. He just kind of feeds them pretty consistently through the year, maybe smaller meals, so they're not overweight, but they have a reasonable weight to them. There was a study that was done in ball pythons. Oh, I've done ball python maternal incubation as well. But ball pythons, they found that the females will lose about 6% of their body weight during maternal incubation. So yeah, not like their body weight after they lay their eggs compared to when the eggs hatch is only about 6%. So that's not too dramatic, and in Abby's case, that might be a gram or two of weight or pound of two, I guess. I can't, yeah, but not a lot, 6% is reasonable, and putting back 6%, weight on your steak is probably not going to be that dramatic. And most of our captive animals are overfed anyway, probably have plenty of fat reserves and don't really need all that much, especially compared to a wild python. And they did show, there was a study done again by Shine's group on water pythons. I think they called it the golden spoon, or the silver spoon theory, where they were, if the female had good body weight, was eating a lot, that kind of thing, then the babies tended to be more robust and doing better. So again, going back to the kind of multi-factor things that go into this, how the female was raised from a hatchling plays into, how well they're going to maternally incubate, or how many eggs they're going to produce, or how big the eggs are, or how small the eggs are. And that's also kind of an interesting, weird thing, like, depending on the age and size of your female and how, I guess, I'm not sure all what goes into this, but sometimes you'll have a lot of smaller eggs or fewer larger eggs within the same species. So kind of a lot, again, a multifactorial process is involved in reproduction, especially with pythons. Pythons tend also to be capital breeders, I believe. Ben Morrill would know a lot more about this than I would, but he kind of taught me about this. But so they are kind of, their body has, checkpoints. Like if you have enough weight or fat reserves or water supply or whatever, all these things are kind of factored into whether or not they're going to reproduce in the future. So again, going back to care before the female lays eggs is very important in this regard too. To first be successful, get fertile eggs, know when you need to introduce the male and things like that. And so I have a fairly large and diverse collection. And so I kind of take the easy way and keep pairs together pretty much year round until the female's gravid. So then they know when they're cycling, they know when things are productive, breeding's going to be productive. And so I don't have to make that call. And I have too many snakes to palpate each one to see, or ultrasound each one to see if they're cycling. So I kind of, I envy Abby in that regard. That's cool to be able to know that detail about each of your animals. That's really cool. And, I think I probably should move towards that, get rid of some of my animals so I can pay a little more attention to all of them. But I'm too ADD or whatever. But so I think, that's I don't know. Did I just word diarrhea all over the place? Am I making any sense here? But so, yeah, I guess with all those different species, there's different aspects that go into it, different things to consider. But yeah, so my species count is around 6 or 7, I guess.
And if you were to recommend one of those 6 or 7 for a first timer to try MI with, would it be Antaresia?
Probably. Antaresia are typically really good at wrapping up their eggs. The carpets weren't bad either, but it's easier to provide those suitable conditions for a 3-foot snake versus a 15-foot python. It's easier to kind of control those surroundings, or to let the animal have multiple choices within a box, within your cage or enclosure system. So I think that lends to success, or the chances of success when you can give the female multiple options within her enclosure and let her kind of choose where she wants to incubate. Makes it kind of easier that way when you have a little tiny python versus a giant python.
Is it true that the whole rotating of the egg is not actually a problem? Is that because I feel like I know that everybody still marks their eggs, the top of the egg.
Yeah.
You see that everywhere. Paul, in your experience, didn't Bobby actually rotate the entire clutch or invert the entire clutch of eggs?
Yeah, because they were glued together like in an egg mass the size of like a volleyball or a basketball, and she left the clutch almost every day to go bask. And when she would come back, when she was wrapping the eggs, she was all the way around them like a shell. She wasn't coiled on top; she was all the way around them. And so in coiling them, when she would come back into the egg box, the whole egg mass would just rotate. So and I had a camera in there, so every day when she would leave and I could look at the eggs without her on them, I was getting a completely different view. So yeah, she was moving them every day, a lot.
Are you sure they went upside down, or were they turning,
Yep.
you know?
No,
Okay.
for sure.
Did you have any marked so you could kind of track?
I took screenshots every day and figured out, like, because they were glued together in different orientations to each other, it was possible to say, okay, that one is number 1, that's 2, that's 3. And then the next day I could see, like, okay, now it's tipped like this. So it definitely wasn't just spinning on an axis. It was a 3-dimensional tumble.
Interesting. Sorry, Adam, taking your
No. I thought that was really, really interesting, and it stressed the hell out of me at first. But and then I spent so much time staring at these pictures every day and marking them up on my computer, trying to figure out which one was which, because it's like, wait a second, now those are those 3 that are parallel, and now I can't see them at all. So are they down? Are they in the back? But
wow.
I came away pretty convinced that they were just there. She wasn't keeping him in any kind of orientation at all.
Yeah. I think that
I was just going to say, she left the nest less as the incubation went on, and at the end she wasn't really leaving. So it could be that at the beginning there was a lot more disturbance, if that's the word you want to use, that she was manipulating them quite a bit more at the beginning than at the end. That's certainly the case. That's certainly possible, because I couldn't see it since she wasn't leaving him anymore.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the hard, fast rule of the egg needs to be in the same orientation from the minute it's laid is out the window. That's not a hard, fast rule. And I think there's plenty of examples of eggs rolling and you don't know which way's up, and but there is an aspect of the embryo does attach on, and they have kind of a little pocket, or wherever they're respirating and things like that. So there is an orientation to the egg, but whether or not that has to necessarily remain upright or
exactly.
The idea was that as the egg is laid, the embryo attaches to the top of the egg. And if you twist it or move it, then the egg could drown because the pressure of the yolk or whatever would push down on the embryo. And I think, that's a great example, Paul. A very interesting observation to see that the eggs moved upside down and all around. And chicken eggs or bird eggs in general, they're rotated very regularly.
Right.
So they're also hard shelled, so I don't know if that makes a difference, and I think there must have been some observation of eggs dying, but maybe they just blamed it on that because they didn't have a better answer. And so that became one of those hard, fast herpetocultural rules that you don't rotate an egg or it dies, because somebody had their eggs rotated and they died, so they assumed that was the cause.
Right.
And then they came up with a explanation for that in retrospect.
And turtles are a lot more vulnerable to it than snakes, as I understand. What's his name was talking about that on NPR, the guy who studied the children's pythons.
DiNardo.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great listen. I really enjoyed that episode. He's kind of the master of maternal incubation for sure. Knows a lot more than most people, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah. It's cool. Anytime this topic comes up, it's always super interesting, and it's and you guys all ask each other questions. It's don't there's no need for apologies. You guys probably will come up with better questions than I will. So let's see here. Let's see, where am I at on these questions? Okay. So Abby, did you get any advice from anybody that had successfully done maternal incubation, or did you have like a mentor or anybody specific that you were going to, or was it just sort of various people in the hobby that were kind of your mentor for the process, or none at all?
Yes and no. So Stella belongs to Garrett over at Reach Out Reptiles, where we have her for long-term care. We'll keep her forever. If that winds up being the case. But so I kind of conferred with him in terms of this, like, can I be crazy and maternally incubate? your snake. And he was all for it. He had tried it in the past unsuccessfully, so didn't have a ton of like tips. The one thing that was really, really helpful was mixing in charcoal with the spag that I had in her lay box. So the lay box like ingredients are super, super simple. At least the ones that I use, it's spag, charcoal, and springtails, and that's it. But yeah, other than that, it was really just setting her up in a way that I felt facilitated the environment that she would need to succeed with maternal incubation. But it really was just kind of like kind of shooting blind because I wasn't sure, like, humidity level, right? Like, what's the optimal humidity level for a retic clutch? I couldn't find that information. What are the optimal temps? Okay, I have the AI temps that people keep at, but I don't have anything MI based. And considering that nature is an SOB sometimes, it's like, do I like that? Will she benefit off of a consistent temperature? Does she, like, what does she need? I don't know. Luckily, she was very, very amicable to me being a helicopter mom while she was on her eggs, because I checked on her like every other day. She had a little hide and I would lift it up. But yeah, I just kind of worked with her and based any adjustments off of her behavior and just tried to pay really close attention to like how she was wrapping her eggs. Is she complete? Like, can I see any eggs? Does she need a little bit of a humidity boost? Is she really struggling? I was able to slip in a goby on top of the clutch shortly after she laid. She is a docile girl and she let me do that. So I was able to get some additional like inside scoop data, what was going on inside of the clutch. So that was really helpful.
Cool.
Yeah.
What can you give us some of that data?
Yeah. So humidity level, inside the coils, humidity was about 100% the entire time. Temperatures would fluctuate as much as I think she fluctuated as much as 7 degrees. Usually she would temp, like if I temp gunned her, she would temp gun hotter than the surrounding area. So that just kind of backs up, Justin, what you found in your MI. Like they really do. April was the same way. She would temp 5 to 7 degrees hotter than the surrounding area.
Mm-hmm.
So they do have some capability to kind of internally regulate those temps while they're on eggs, which is just so fascinating. So yeah, that was kind of, it was eye-opening because it's like, okay, this is not nearly as, she's not keeping those eggs nearly as stringent in terms of parameters as like doing AI, where it's like, if the humidity adjusts like 1%, it's like, oh crap, they're all going to die. It's like, maybe not though. Like she's helping me understand a lot. And granted, I have never done artificial, so I do not have any experience with that. So this is strictly from an MI perspective, but I do think that there's a lot of information that we're missing in terms of how to do AI successfully based on how the moms are doing it. Because it's just not, like Justin was saying, it's not how things have been done for the past several decades in the hobby. And I think there's a lot of valuable information to be found still.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Paul?
As far as what were the conditions in the nest box, or?
Well, you can get to that, but like, did you have like, who are your go-to, your mentors? Did you have any, like, who did you seek out advice from?
Well, both of these guys here, I mean, I hadn't talked to Justin beforehand, but hearing, especially Justin and Eric Burke, both talk about MI on podcasts throughout the NPR back catalog was really inspiring and gave me the idea that, okay, this is something that's achievable, and it's not some crazy thing. It's, people do it. So that was fantastic. And neither one of them are like, raving ideological granolas, right? They actually,
unlike you,
care about whether things work. So, and then Abby was fantastic. that was actually how Abby and I first met. I reached out to Abby right around the time that Bobby laid, or was about, I guess, a little bit before that. But I think, Abby, you were like a couple months ahead of me in
Yeah. I think Bobby laid right after Stella's babies hatched.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Perfectly, yeah.
And so I know I've talked about it before, but you gave me that great quote that that just stuck with me the whole time, that the very first day after Bobby laid and she left the eggs, and she was basking, and I was just like, oh shit, she's abandoned she's abandoned the eggs. Like, oh, this is all terrible. I mean, thank God I have an incubation box ready to go, but what do I do? What do I do? And I called up Abby, and she's just like, yeah, there's still time to trust her. She's been off the eggs for like 45 minutes. But that was my mantra throughout, that there's time to trust her. And every time something happened where I was just like, I have to solve this problem right now, that was my fallback, to just like take a breath, and actually observe and try and see, like, is she actually doing something wrong? And that was such helpful advice, not just in terms of MI, but just in terms of being a good keeper in general. I think that has really stuck with me. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, and that was derived from what I wish I had done for myself, because I was the same way. Like, any tiny little thing that changed in like Stella's behavior, or like the eggs like would start dimpling or whatever, like, oh no, what did I do wrong? What is she doing wrong? And it's like, I was able to take that approach with April this year. It's like, trust the process, trust her. It'll be, more than likely it'll be okay. And if it's not, it probably wasn't meant to be in the first place. And I probably wouldn't have done a whole lot to change that. So that was kind of I was much more grounded this season than I was last year.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure I would be too on a second clutch with her if I went ahead and did that. Absolutely. And then, I talked to a number of other keepers, people who breed scrubs, and the reaction I generally got from people was, man, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I think it's cool if you want to do it. I wouldn't. And, people had various rationales for why they weren't enthusiastic about it. But I think part of it is the more towards rack keeping and sort of low gradient keeping you are, the harder MI is to do. I would make that generalization generally, I think. And people were pretty direct about that. Like, I would be worried about whether I'd be able to maintain the right parameters for the mom while sitting on the eggs. And when I talked about it with them, and just sort of in my own thinking process, I was like, well, if I have a wide gradient in the enclosure, then I don't have to get it exactly right. I can allow her to do that process. Whereas if she were in a smaller enclosure or in a rack, I'd have a lot less margin for error. So that was really helpful in sort of framing my thinking about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of Lisa's horror story with the ball pythons, with the MI, with the eggs getting like baked to the bottom of the tub, and then like, oh man, yeah, that was a gnarly one.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. But then to Abby's point, as far as like how much variation there was in the conditions in the nest box, it was a lot. That I did have temperature control in the nest box. I was able to keep it within a few degrees of temperature swing, and generally a couple degrees lower than you would do for artificial incubation. But Bobby would leave almost every day, like I was saying, and go bask, and she would get her body temperature up to 100 degrees, and then go back in the nest. And I had a Goby in there, and you could see the temperature would completely spike and then come down over the course of several hours. And those eggs were well outside the parameters of what somebody would be comfortable putting in for artificial incubation, both above and below. And they did just fine.
What was the highest temperature you saw?
I would say kind of low 90s, maybe 90, I don't know, 93, 94. It wouldn't stay there for very long. And I didn't have my Govee was not inside her coils. It was just next to her. So I don't know what was going on with the eggs themselves. She might have gotten the eggs a good bit hotter than that, but and then it would get down into the, I don't know, maybe 82, 83, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, right, still is at almost the exact same kind of temperature gradient.
Yep.
90. I don't think they got above 93, but I mean, there's some intervals where she cooled them up to down to 80, 82. Yeah.
And there was a lot of variation with how tightly she would keep the eggs coiled. You know, she would she'd loosen and tighten. And I tried to see if I could tease out a strict pattern of okay, is she doing that only when the temperature is outside of these parameters, or the humidity in the nest box is outside of these parameters? And I couldn't really tell a difference, but she never kept a tight coil for more than a couple of hours. She opened up, basically 24/7 for almost 3 months. She would crack her coils every few hours and nose around in there and check on the eggs and see what the conditions were, and then either tighten back up or stay loosely coiled or leave.
So how about you, Justin? Who were your mentors when you first MI'd that clutch out of desperation?
Yeah, that was I would, if I remember, I mean, this is in the year 2000 or 2001, somewhere around. So it's been a little while, and I'm getting old, so my memory is not great. But I remember talking to Casey Lazick and picking his brain, because he'd maternal incubated Brettles and probably Angolans and a few others. He had a lot of experience and is kind of the Python master. So I relied on his advice and information. And basically it was just you need to give them a close to 100% relative humidity without having a wet environment. And if you can provide that within, a temperature that's close to what they need for incubation, or, that you would use for artificial incubation, maybe a few degrees cooler than that, it's really pretty, not difficult to give them the right surroundings and give them the right temperatures. And I know we when we were monitoring clutches and such for the book, Nick and I discussed a lot of the, bouncing back and forth, how we were going to set them up. And again, Nick was trying to say, okay, you need your nest box here. And the female is saying, nope, I want it over here. So it's, the female will tell you a lot too, I think, if you listen. And so, being kind of the student of the serpent, as Eric likes to say, and Keith McPeak is very important. So I think, and also hearing, from Paul and Abby and kind of the things that they observed just increases my knowledge about maternal incubation, and how to better do that, or how to things to consider that I hadn't thought about before. So I think I'm continuing to learn and grow and I guess develop different ideas about how to better do it, or how I would do it again if I, down the road. Some of the pitfalls I've run into again are, the hydric conditions. If you don't have it enough, moisture in the environment, or, say they lay outside the nest box and they're leaving the eggs and the eggs are drying out too much or something like that, things like that could potentially happen, or the female just abandons the clutch. And I've taken some abandoned clutches and tried to artificially incubate them after that, and it's usually not great. And I sometimes I wonder if the female recognizes what eggs are bad and which eggs are going to go the distance, and they make that call. I know Dave Barker was talking about this, that they had a National Geographic film crew at their place that was filming for one of their, I think they were on an episode of National Geographic Explorer or something like that, where they came and talked about these python breeders, and they had filmed a female while she it was Antaresia. I think it was a children's python or something, related. And they were filming her lay her eggs, right? And she got to one egg that she'd just laid and kind of nosed around it, and then used her nose and just kind of flipped it out of the area. And so Dave went in, grabbed the egg, put it back, with the clutch, and she was nosing the clutch and nosing around all the eggs. She went to that same egg and flipped it out of the coils. And so Dave took that egg and incubated it artificially, and it was a dud. It didn't hatch. It wasn't fertile. And so he's like, well, she knew it wasn't fertile, so that's another thing, that the females will know their eggs better than we do. And so they'll know which ones are good and which ones are worth wrapping around, not completely, because obviously there's some that they'll wrap up that are duds or will fail. So I don't think they have total precognition, but they do have probably a better idea than we would about which ones are viable or which ones they want to incubate. There was also, the literature is very helpful too, because there's a lot of different studies that they've looked at. They did a study where they took eggs out of a clutch, and reduced the clutch size so the female could easily wrap around it. They also artificially expanded the clutch size. So they took eggs from a different female and put them with the female when she was laying. And so she wrapped those eggs. So it was too big for her to surround completely with her coils. And they saw that there was a difference in the mortality rate of the eggs. Like, a lot of the eggs didn't hatch. I think there was upwards of like 60% mortality, if I remember correctly. It was pretty high rate of loss of those babies if they had too many eggs. So, that could play a factor. Maybe our very well-fed captive animals might lay more than they normally would. You see that commonly, like clutch sizes from wild pythons versus our captive clutches. In the wild, green tree pythons maybe lay 10 to 12 eggs or something, but in these captive overfed green trees, they'll lay 35 eggs, and half of them will be slugs or something. So sometimes, giving them too much is not necessarily a better thing in some ways. And so it all just kind of plays into this cosmic octopus, or the complex makeup of the whole thing. But yeah, really cool stuff.
Something that I'm curious about is the transmission of disease from the mother to the offspring. And, cause I've heard Nick talk about that, that, he takes the eggs, puts them in the incubator, which is in like a separate facility. And, he never deals with, the eggs after dealing with the adult animals, and same with hatchlings. And so there's really a disconnect there. And I see a lot of benefit in that in regards to, things like Nido and all that. Right. But what about all the beneficial bacteria? Cause like you think about like natural birth versus a C-section, right? I wish I knew where I heard it, and I wish I had the actual figures, but there's like some preposterous amount of your percentage of your gut biome comes from your natural birth. From just picking up all that stuff from your mother as you're on your way out, so it makes me wonder if there's some benefit for the neonates coming out of the eggs to be right there with mom and all of her stuff that she's picked up over her lifetime, good or bad, but primarily good.
Right. I think there is some thought into that, but it's of course it's extremely complicated. The gut microbiome is, you think, okay, well, if I change this, then this will happen, but it's not as straightforward. There's a very complex environment in the gut, and a very dynamic balance of bacteria and things like that. So and we have them in a box in captivity. So are these the natural gut microbiome that they have? I always like to joke, like, we are more bacteria. There's more bacterial cells in our body than there are human cells. So are we bacteria, or are we human? So like there's a lot of bacteria in us, living in our guts and things like that. So they outnumber our human. I heard a figure that. I guess I should probably verify that. That may not be true, but
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
something interesting to think about, and something that kind of illustrates that dynamic nature. And I heard somebody talking like, oh, I give all my snakes all natural stuff so they can be like they are in the wild. But then they said, well, I gave them a probiotic like yogurt or something. You're like, well, that's not natural. There's no snakes out there eating yogurt in the wild. And so like, those kind of things. And so our understanding of that is, just, we don't know anything when it comes to the natural gut microbiome of reptiles, for very little anyway. And if we do know anything, it probably just opens more questions than it answers. And so it's really hard to make a definitive statement in that regard of,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's important. I mean, obviously, we've found various things with the human gut microbiome that play a role in, weight and health and, dietary, those gut bacteria control us in a lot of ways. And so maybe we are bacteria rather than human, but it's a very complex issue. We did a study with virus infection where we changed the diet of laboratory rodents and then challenged them with a virus, and it completely changed the outcome of the viral infection when we changed their diet. It was really an interesting thing, and it shocked me. I didn't think it would play a role at all. I thought it would make it worse, and it actually made it better because we switched them from, their balanced lab diet to a typical Western diet of high fat, high sugar kind of, that kind of diet. And it actually prevented them from getting severe disease from one of the viruses that we infected with. And so it was like, wow, you wouldn't think that this crappy Western diet would actually help them. And so, that kind of thing where it's not just as simple as saying, oh, if you eat better, you're going to be better all around. And I think, one of the things I found in researching maybe an explanation to why this happened was there was, a bacteria that grows in the gut, and especially in people on a vegetarian diet, and it actually contributes to inflammation. So people that were vegetarians if they had this profile with this bacteria that was kind of, one of the leading bacteria in their guts, they were actually more prone to inflammatory diseases and, IBS and things like that. So you're thinking, wow. Oh, these poor people think I'm being a vegetarian to be healthy, and then they're getting more inflammatory disease, So, just one of the complex things that goes into this idea of gut microbiome. Now, of course, in this day and age of Nido and things like that, one of the best things about Nido, or now they're called serpentoviruses, but sure. Best thing about those is that they don't transmit from the female through the egg to the offspring. And so if you do artificially incubate them, they will be born, they'll hatch out without nidovirus. So that's a benefit, especially if you're a commercial breeder like Nick and you're producing a lot of offspring. You don't want to have to deal with that aspect of it. And, he's said many times he's not going to test for nido because it would cost extremely a lot of money. And then once you find out, what do you do about it? So he just says, well, my answer is like, if I keep the eggs separate from the females, then the babies aren't going to have it. And so I can be confident in selling those babies nido free type, idea. So yeah, that's, I guess one of the good things that we learned about nido during this whole process. But as for beneficial bacteria, it's, your guess is as good as mine. It's hard to say. Yeah. But here's one other thing sorry, I'm kind of blabbing on here, but there was a study done. I found a reference to this, but I can't ever find the original study. But they took crocodile eggs and they painted them with strawberry flavor, or strawberry extract, or maybe even ground up strawberries. I can't remember what they used, but they painted some of the eggs with the strawberry flavor, and they didn't paint the other half of the eggs or whatever. And they had several clutches of crocodile eggs. The crocodiles hatched out. It was like at a croc farm or whatever, so they were being raised for skin trade or whatever, but they had numbers anyway of captive crocodiles. And after the crocodiles hatched out, they did, they were feeding them and stuff, and they offered strawberries to some of the offspring, and the ones that had been painted on their shell looked at strawberries as food, and they would eat the strawberries significantly more frequently than the ones that didn't have their eggs painted. So there could be something to do with, especially, considering Antaresia are very difficult to get started on lab rodents, giving them pinkies, they usually want to look for a lizard to eat or something. So potentially having the female there and maybe even feeding the female while she's on eggs might scent those eggs, and they might recognize rodents as food more readily. We did some study. Nick tried this where he took like a section of pantyhose and put some like bedding from his rodents in the pantyhose and put it in the incubation chamber with the eggs to see if that might influence the eggs to eat better when they hatch out. But I think all he ended up with was just like a gross mess of rotting, bedding inside pantyhose. So I don't think it really was very conclusive. So, but something to that extent might have an influence on the offspring if they maybe maternally incubated Antaresia with a female that's a rodent eater might be more prone to eat rodents. Who knows? It's hard to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, who the hell came up with the idea of putting strawberry juice on crocodile eggs?
I think the point was it was so foreign to their normal diet that if they selected strawberries at all, it would be very evident that it was because they painted it on the shells or they had some exposure in the egg to that scent. So
that's so interesting.
Crazy.
Yeah. I wonder if you could just take like how you get that foul smelling rodent water after you thaw out rodents, if you could just paint that on some eggs and see if it makes a difference. That'd be interesting.
Right. I mean, I'd be cautious because getting eggs too wet can drown the eggs, of course, so if you're going to do that, do it, and I don't know, maybe I guess you could maybe mix up the incubation, the substrate, like your vermiculite or something, use the water, use a rodent flavored water instead of your
gross
add a diffuser with rodent scent in the enclosure.
So
maybe get a vaporizer and make a cool mist of rodent water. That'd be so nasty. It's like one of the few smells that makes me dry heave is like when you get it. Yeah,
ammonia.
We need to make. Yeah. Maybe we could start marketing a line of like rodent scented candles for the incubation.
Oh, retic owners would love that, Paul.
Yeah, right. all the male.
Yeah, hot all of a sudden.
Right. Hijinks ensue.
Yeah. It's feeding time all the time. I'm always going to be keyed up, ready to bite whatever comes into my enclosure.
Oh man, God. I just picture that candle with like hairs sticking out of it.
You could just use tails for the wicks.
Yeah. Some little toes sticking out. Oh, that's so nasty.
This conversation has gotten very derailed a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's totally me. So Abby, when going forward, if you end up with another clutch, are you gonna just keep doing MI? Do you ever see yourself doing AI just for the experience now?
Nope.
Not a chance?
No, I really enjoy the enrichment aspect of MI. Like, I just feel like there's a lot to the process in terms of, like, we tried pairing April 2 years ago when she was 5, and the way that we pair, we do a lot of space so they can lock up if the timing is right. If it's not, like, they're on opposite ends of the enclosure, right? Like, I'm not going to put them in tiny little like spaces to kind of essentially force a pairing. So it's from the very start of like that behavioral observation and the pairing all the way through like eggs hatching. I think it's just it satiates my curiosity in terms of behavior through that entire reproductive process. And I do think that it is a thing, like to Justin's point, like this is what the females just are, they know how to do it. They're, they don't want to leave the clutch for a reason, in my opinion. So it's like, cool, like we're going to let you do what you were, meant to do and have learned to do instinctually over the last, millions and millions of years. So I don't feel like I don't have any need to really remove that aspect of my keeping. So yeah, I have no plans to do that. I'll just be MI moving forward with my pair.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
Do you have an incubator set up in case? Because I mean, a lot of times females won't wrap their eggs. Like this year, I had some inland carpets, and the female actually wrapped the other female and the eggs were sitting there. She had just laid them, and then she's trying to wrap around the other female. So they're like in this weird ball entwined, and then the eggs are just sitting there. So I'm like, you idiots! Like maybe it's my fault for having two females in the same cage.
We got confused.
Yeah. So there is a chance that the female won't
wrap her eggs.
Incubate them properly. So.
Yeah. No, we do not have an incubator, which I know is terrifying. We also only ever do one clutch a year. Like we're so small scale. All of our breeders are pets. Mm-hmm. So right. It's one of those things. It's back to kind of trusting mom. It's like, if she lays them and she's like, peace, it's probably for a reason. Mm-hmm. So yeah, kind of removing, it's hard because you have to remove that like desire to control an environment for the sake of keeping the babies safe. Right. And kind of putting that, like transferring that trust to the instinct driven decisions that the mom is making. And that's definitely a hard shift to make.
Right.
But yeah, that's just kind of my approach. It kind of has to be the approach with MI from my experience anyway, because it's like, it's kind of out of your hands. It's like up to mom. Right. You can facilitate to some extent and base off of what you think the mom's behavior is asking for. But ultimately, it's kind of up to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good answer.
I don't know if that's an idiot decision or if that's just, I don't know. But yeah, we don't have an incubator.
It's like skydiving without a parachute.
Is it though?
No, that's just different. I guess that's just dying. What about you, Paul? You ever gonna, if you produce more, are you gonna stick with MI? Is that your jam, or or would you ever?
For sure.
Okay.
And I would do it even more like, or I would do less intervention. There like if I were to do it again, I would do several things differently. I would leave the babies with the mom for probably a few weeks, and provide, I'd set up the cage so that there'd be places that they could go, hides or rock cracks where they could go and be. I never had a sense that I would have to protect the babies from the mom, or from the dad for that matter. But I would set it up so that there were hides and cracks that the babies could get to that the adults wouldn't be able to get to, and leave them all together for a while. And I would also actually allow the dad to have access to, basically I'd keep them all in one big happy family for the entire time. So because I still think that Amos, the dad, knew what was going on. He, the day the babies pipped, he went just completely bonkers in his cage in a way that he hadn't before or after. That was I have no explanation for how he would know, if he did know, or why he would, why he would be reacting to that. But it seemed like a pretty strong signal. And then reading and chatting with Gavin about what he's noticed with male attendants and nest protection in Owen Pelly's, that the males definitely were involved while the mom was doing MI. The males were protecting, and he had really placid males that he never had to worry about at all, except when the mom was sitting on eggs. And so that would be my goal next time. Actually, it would be to explore all of that kind of stuff and see if I could pull any of that off. I think that'd be super cool.
In some constrictors, don't they? Is there like, do the females ever cannibalize the male?
I don't know. Either of you guys know with pythons?
Was it ring pythons or?
Oh yeah, for sure, ring pythons, right?
I mean, with like Papuans and stuff, right?
Papuan pythons, yeah.
But,
okay, I could have swore I heard recently about anacondas do it as well, and I had to like verify that. But like the male will like basically just get eaten by the female, so she has more calories to get her through the gestation.
Spider method.
Yeah.
Are these observations that have been made in the wild or in animals in captivity?
That's a great question.
I mean, with the pythons and the Papuans, it's in captivity at least, right?
Yeah, during breeding, especially like breeding trials, you'll throw a male in to breed your female, and the female will eat the male instead of letting him breed with her. So that's kind of dicey with those species for sure.
Yeah, I know with retics, there's no like cannibalizing the males, but there are I have known several instances of the male or the female getting decently injured. But those are more due to like the limited space for them to move away from each other if it's not the right timing, or if the female is cycling and she's just like, not today, Satan, right? Getting in the mood.
You wouldn't think the male would cannibalize the offspring because if they're his, but that's a potential risk or potential concern. I don't know that that's been documented. I know when I was breeding milk snakes, I had the male and the female together. I didn't realize she was gravid. This was early days, and all of a sudden she laid eggs, and I was trying to get the eggs, and while I was trying to get the eggs, the male was trying to eat the eggs, and so I was like, I had to wrestle one out of his mouth, and it was not great. So I'm like, okay, note to self, females, if they look like this, take the male out. So there is a chance, I guess, of cannibalism of the offspring if the male is hungry, or if he doesn't recognize them as his or whatever. I know lions will kill offspring that aren't theirs so they can mate with the female and produce their own offspring sometimes. So it's not unheard of in the animal kingdom to eat babies. Kind of gruesome.
Yeah, that's cannibalism's scary one. I always think of that picture that Ryan put up like maybe a year and a half ago of his Apodora just totally shredded. Just I think it was the male was just shredded by the female. I mean, the laceration was insane.
Right.
And that is definitely terrifying.
Yeah.
So Justin, going forward, are you going to just keep incorporating MI as needed, or is it something that you're going to do purposefully, or is it just kind of like, I'll give it a go this, with this clutch?
Yeah, I mean, my last bout with MI, it went terribly wrong. So I have some lizards, so I started ordering crickets, and with the crickets came those horrible phorid flies that just persist for, I've tried all sorts of ways to get rid of them, but and they'll disappear kind of over the winter, but then they come roaring back in the summer. And anytime, with a couple hundred snakes, it's hard to make sure there's no poop in any cage. So, they're finding a place to kind of persist, I guess. So that's very frustrating. And they have such a quick turnaround too, from, egg to fly. So, and the last time I tried MI, they overran the clutch while the female was around it, which, wasn't great for the female or the eggs. So, that's one thing, to maybe be aware of, that if you have those forward flies, and I know a lot of collections do, that, you be careful of that.
What do you mean they overran the clutch?
They laid their eggs all over the snake eggs, and then the little fly maggots would hatch and be crawling all through the eggs. And if there was a bad egg, they would eat that egg. It didn't seem like they were messing with the good eggs, but just the fact that they were laying their eggs all over the surface of the eggs reduced respiration, things like that. So the clutch just ended up being abandoned by the female, and
wow.
I tried to maternally incubate it after that, but the fly kept going in and squishing all the maggots and trying to clean up the eggs as best I could. But they would lay their eggs like in the middle of the clutch where you couldn't see the eggs, and it was too late to kind of separate them out and things like that. So it was just a train wreck. So that's one thing, I learned the hard way and lost a clutch that way. So, one thing. So I guess in answer to your question, I probably won't try it until I can clear the room of those horrible flies. And where I'm ordering crickets on a regular basis, they have the opportunity to, be reintroduced. And so I don't know a great way around that.
Those are, they're fruit flies, right? Like they'll reproduce on fruit.
They're not. No, they're actually, they scavengers that feed on decaying organic matter. So they usually come in on the dead crickets. Like they'll lay their eggs on a dead cricket, and then the maggots will eat the cricket, after it's dead. They're not killing the healthy crickets. They're just eating the dead ones. And so like if you have a dead rodent, or like the rodent that didn't get eaten, and I go in and check the next morning or whatever to make sure everybody ate their food, there'll be a dead rodent in the cage, and there's just flies all over it, and they've already laid their eggs. And so if they have a messy cage or something, they just unload in their cage, and then some of the flies are in there just getting the moisture and laying their eggs on the poop and all that kind of stuff. So they're just a big headache.
Yeah. We had those show up because of a superworm that we put into a frog enclosure, and it died, and then they laid their eggs on the superworm.
Right.
And they are a pain in the ass to get rid of. We ended up as horrible as it, like I hate the aesthetics in my house of fly paper. Right. But we did put that up, and it seemed to work pretty effectively. But with you keeping crickets, like, man, that's got to be so hard to get ahead of.
It's a headache. Yeah. I don't know. So right now I'm just kind of like, I don't think I'm going to try MI, at least in my reptile room,
Yeah.
maybe outside of there, but it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, so we're actually kind of covering some of these, questions here because we keep kind of branching off,
tangents.
Yeah. So Abby, what did your setup look like? Did you have a radiant? So you had a nest box, and was there a radiant heat panel over that nest box? And then what was the temperature set to for your heating, and like where would the female go and bask, all that good stuff?
Oh geez. Okay. So I'm trying to just remember exactly all the parameters that I did. So I actually done it in two different setups. So Stella, I set up in a freaking humongous Toad Ranch bioactive enclosure. So it's 12 feet long, 4 feet tall, 30 inches deep. With the way that I had it customized was with maternal incubation for her in mind. So it has two separate shelves, like basking shelves with two separate gradients, obviously. And then it has a longitudinally, it has a kind of hot side on the floor and then a cooler side on the floor. So the gradient in that enclosure is anywhere from up to 91 at the hottest basking point underneath the RHP that's over the tallest shelf, all the way down to 70 on the cool side. And she utilized all of it while she was gravid. I set up her nest box on the top shelf, the highest shelf closest to the RHP, with a hide over it. It was like one of the like cement tubs from Lowe's, like an $8 giant hide for her that we like did a little round hole in there to give her access, and put this fag in there. She had substrate mix on the ground level with a decent gradient with lots of different heights on the ground as well. So essentially she could have laid anywhere in that enclosure that she wanted to. So she utilized the space, cool side, hot side, all different temperature gradients and humidity gradients while she was gravid. And then she laid in the lay box right underneath the RHP. I think I had the RHP set to 85 during the entire incubation. And yeah, she just hung out there. She didn't leave. So she kind of, the retics sound like they're kind of opposite of, Paul, what you observed in Bobby in terms of willingness to leave the nest. So she was just glued to her nest, would not leave for the first, couple months. She did take, I think, 2 meals while she was on her nest, would not leave her nest to eat it. She ate in the lay box and then would leave the nest. She only left the nest like 2 days before the eggs started pipping. So she just hung out in that same gradient the entire time. And just I never changed the temp on the RHP, but her temps would still fluctuate for the eggs, which I think is just super cool. And then towards the last couple of days, this is where like my last freak out when she was on the eggs, is she shifted from being coiled around, like diligently coiled around the eggs. She shifted to kind of laying next to the eggs, still in the lay box. But there was no pips yet. So I was like, oh no, like what happened? Did everybody die? Like freaking out. But no, sure. Like 2 days later, there's little pips. So I think she had just shifted off of them because she knew they were getting ready to pip. And she's like, oh, let me get out of the way. And she hung out in the lay box with them for close to a week after they pipped out of the eggs. Yeah.
Okay. And just kind of a follow-up question with that. How long did you let the babies stay with her before separating them? Did you let them get to their first shed?
I let them leave on their own. Like, so they had a whole 12-foot enclosure to go, like, baby explore whenever they were ready to leave. So I would just come and check on them. Like I usually would get up like 2 a.m. because they're babies. So they're usually like want to leave in the dead of night. But yeah, I would just pop downstairs and I would see like a baby or two, like just out exploring. So I would just yoink them out at that point and put them in their little cohab enclosure. But yeah, I did the same thing with April, even though she was on a much simpler setup, like just waited for the babies to leave. So yeah. Okay. All on their terms.
All right. What about you, Paul? What were your temperatures and how did you make the choice of where the nest box would go?
So I had the RHPs in the cage. I think they were set at 85 as well. And then the nest box was at the cooler end of the enclosure where it's darker. And then I actually used the camera that was in the nest box that was the heater for the nest box itself. So it was plugged into a Govee smart plug, and the smart plug would turn off if the Govee that was in the nest box said the temperature got up to like, I think I had it set for 86. So something like that at 86, the camera would turn off. And then once the temperature dropped back down to 84 or something like that, the camera would turn back on. And that did a nice job of keeping just sort of fine tuning the temperature in the nest box. And the camera was on almost all the time. it would shut off mostly if she came back from basking extra hot. Then the camera would shut off for maybe a couple hours and then turn back on as she cooled down.
Oh, wow.
That was a nice solution. It was super easy once I got it dialed in. And I didn't realize it initially how much heat that camera produced. And it would have definitely overheated the nest box. So the other thing that was really good was that I think I had a 17-quart tub that the nest box was made out of. So that allowed her to do the same thing of that Abby's describing, that once the baby started pipping, she was able to be, instead of encircling the eggs, she went to being more of a donut around the outside most of the time. Sometimes she would kind of gather her coils on top of them a bit more, especially if she heard me messing around outside, then she would get a little bit more protective of them. But for the most part, she stayed around the perimeter of them instead of being right over them.
Okay. And how long did the baby stay with her?
3 days.
Okay.
So they were with her for 3 days, and then they left. And basically, as they left the nest, my son and I, we just kept a watch on the camera once they started leaving, because that was a mistake I made, that the cage itself wasn't secure for the babies. The mesh that I had on the top was too coarse, and it allowed them to get out. So he and I had to stay up in shifts all night long as they came out of the nest, and grab them, and the same thing, put them into the baby enclosure.
And you had the additional fun of dealing with a mite infestation at the same time, right? Which just made it fun. So much better.
Yep, super fun. I mean, thank goodness for NexGard. So, I mean, just briefly, partway through halfway through the incubation, it became apparent that Bobby had a raging mite infection, and she was just covered. You can see him on the camera. It was horrifying. Just covered with mites. And the only thing, I still think that they came to me with mites, and because both of the adult scrubs like to soak from the whole time I had them. And I never observed any. I never saw any water dishes or anything like that. But once I took away her ability to soak, that's when the all of a sudden, then she had this giant bloom of mite infestation. But fortunately, she was eating while she was, or she was willing to eat a couple of times, and that made it really easy to dose her with NexGard. But the life cycle of the mites was long enough that the babies, during the time that they were in the nest box during those 3 days, got infested themselves, which wasn't apparent until about a week or so after they were in the baby enclosure. And all of a sudden, they went from all hiding together in ferns and regular hides to being 5 or 6 of them in a water bottle, in a water dish together. So they immediately went to soaking as well. So we had to tube feed them critical care and NexGard at the age of, I don't know, whatever, it was 2 or 3 weeks. It was before any of them were taking food yet. So all of them got tube fed at the vet with NexGard, and that took care of it.
God, what a nightmare.
Yeah, that was not something I would want to repeat, that aspect of it. Although, it actually wasn't that difficult to address. It was expensive, but it wasn't that difficult to address, and it didn't seem to actually hurt any of them. So,
man, how many babies was it? Yeah.
What's that?
I thought the flies were bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I worry about, if I hadn't been able to treat them with NexGard,
Right.
like, geez, I mean, I don't know how to, because it's one thing to have an adult with covered with hundreds of mites, but to have babies just covered with mites, like, I think that could have gone downhill pretty fast, right?
Right.
So,
How many babies did you have to get dosed at the vet?
14.
Wow. Yeah, geez, I can't imagine that vet bill.
It was about $1,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I was just so, dude, I was so relieved. I mean, I'm sure you guys can imagine, right? Like the stress of that whole thing. It sucked to have to lay out $1,000 for it, but the stress of that, and also feeling like a terrible keeper, and like, oh, how could I have screwed this up so badly? Like that was way worse. So.
All right. So, what are your kind of go-to parameters, for MI, Justin?
So I've done it a lot of different ways. One of my, or a couple early attempts was, with, light on top of the cage. So providing a heat spot. And then the nest box was, various distances away from the heat source. And little give and take where the female could lay her eggs, I guess, in regards to the hot spot. But other attempts have been in a rack system with heat tape on the back, and the females same kind of thing. They could lay just about anywhere in that environment. And again, it's a lot easier with little Antaresia versus giant scrubs or retics. But so, and pretty much, I haven't really seen more or less success based on the cage setup, as long as they have some of those minimal things they need, like the right temperatures and humidity. That's kind of the key. As long as you can provide them a humid environment that's not wet. Again, let's stress that, not wet. And they do fine. One of the early attempts was with a jungle carpet python. I had basically two Rubbermaid containers that I attached to each other. One was opaque and one was clear, and the top one had like a light, and the bottom one was just filled kind of with green moss, and had a large water bowl in there. And so she could kind of come up and bask in the top one and then go down into the bottom one. Like this is my jerry rigging days from back early in my collection days. And it worked fine. She laid her eggs in the green moss, and, they hatched out. I guess, man, you guys got robbed in seeing the female, the babies coming out of the female's coils, because your females left the eggs or whatever. But, so yeah, it's kind of cool to peek down in the cage and see these little baby heads sticking out of the eggs while the mother's kind of loosening the coils a bit. But, so, one interesting thing that I found out with the temperature, what were they? The temperature monitoring system we used within the clutch, was that they got way hotter than I expected them to get. They were up over 90 for, long periods of time. I guess it was kind of cyclic, right? The temperature of the clutch kind of followed the temperature of the room to some extent. And, so it varied fairly wildly. You'd have it maybe get down into the low 80s and then up into the mid 90s, up into maybe even the high 90s at sometimes. And so that was kind of surprising. I always thought, oh, if you vary much from 88 degrees, then you're going to mess up your clutch, but they can handle quite a bit of variability in the temperature. I didn't often observe the females coming off of the eggs, maybe once or twice with that jungle and the weird, Rubbermaid setup, but other than that, they usually stay on the eggs and haven't really left the eggs much. So just, I guess, different species, different setups, and different outcomes, I guess.
Bobby's just an independent woman. She's like, that'll be fine. Go have a smoke real quick, come back.
She didn't want to get all that mess all over.
Right.
Is there all the egg goo?
Oh yeah, they were all like completely slathered with each other's,
Right.
with all of the egg goo. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a big way.
Yeah, but the difference between like that jungle clutch I keep coming back to, like all the eggs looked horrible. Like they looked like they weren't going to hatch. They were all brown and discolored and kind of squished in, and in kind of a ball, because she was really good about keeping wrapped around the eggs. And I'm like, oh man, these aren't going to hatch. And then they had pretty high success rate in hatching maternally incubated eggs versus I think I have a lower hatch rate in my artificially incubated eggs. So I think I would prefer if I had a collection of just, that I could just maternally incubate. That would be probably an ideal for me. I agree with Abby. Like it'd be kind of the best of both worlds that way. And I really don't think it's that difficult to get the females back up to their, their weight, especially in the captive setting. And usually the females are ready to just chow down after they leave their eggs, because they haven't eaten usually for a couple months, during the breeding season, and then a couple months while they're on their eggs. And, I mean, in the wild pythons are probably eating only a couple months out of the year anyway. So it's not like you're changing it too much. You're probably giving them a lot more than they would get in the wild. Even though during the kind of boon season in the wild, they're probably getting more than we would give them in captivity, just in a shorter amount of time. So all those things might play into some of those factors I talked about before, like egg size and egg number and things like that. But it's hard to quantify that, I guess.
How do you guys all keep that humidity in the nest at 100%? Is that from you guys misting the enclosure? Is that from the ambient in the room, or is it from the female urinating on the eggs? Is that like their go-to thing, and it just happens automatically?
I learned a really I guess valuable lesson when thinking about reptiles in the wild with Woma pythons. We got some data from that. I mentioned her before, Melissa Bruton. She's a PhD in Australia, and she was researching Woma pythons, and she found that Woma pythons were in their burrows around 70 to 80% of their lives. Right, most of their time is spent underground, and she measured the humidity and things in these burrow systems, and it's close to, it's over 95%, closer to 100%. And so Woma pythons are spending 75% of their life in a humid environment. And that just kind of was a paradigm shift for me. I always thought Woma pythons are desert sand pythons. They're out in the desert, like they're not experiencing high humidity, but they actually are. Most of their lives are in a burrow, so that's kind of something you need to consider. And I think, providing that environment in a captive setting is pretty easy. It's basically just having a Rubbermaid container, either with a water bowl inside it or close by, and maybe, some layer below the moss or sphagnum or whatever you're using. I guess sphagnum wouldn't be great, but the green moss I like, or I guess shredded cypress or something. But so that there's at least a dry layer. You might have some more moist material below that, but that can all contribute to that humid environment, kind of replicating like a burrow. If you dig a hole, it's not necessarily wet to the touch, but if you cover the top of it, you're going to have condensation or water. There's a lot of water in the air in that environment, so it's not too difficult to do.
Okay. Abby, how about you? How'd you maintain the humidity?
I didn't really. The female did. I would prep with moist fag, like it wouldn't be wet. To Justin's point, don't like. But yeah, if like maybe twice throughout the entire MI process, I would add a little bit of moisture simply by pouring some lukewarm water, like a tiny little bit on like the outside edge of where the spag was. So that way it can kind of do that lower level of the substrate. Yeah. Never misted. I always have water very like close to where the nest is, so mom can access water whenever she wants, because it does seem like they're able to produce a lot of humidity just from their body. I never experienced any of my retics peeing on the eggs. But they also, like, I would offer them food, but they were for the most part not interested in eating the entire time they were on their clutch. Anyway, I think April took 1 meal. I think Stella took 2. But yeah, it was just mostly just them maintaining it through that like level of coil tightness around the clutch.
Okay. Paul, same with you?
Yeah, basically the same deal as Abby. I have a misting system in the enclosure, and I kept that sort of at the high end of what I was comfortable keeping it. And it's controlled by a humidistat, so I think I had it set at, I don't know, maybe 68 to 70%, something like that, a little bit higher at night, but as high as I could maintain the temperature, or I'm sorry, the humidity in there without getting condensation on the glass. And that seemed to be sufficient. That was kind of the nest box never got below that, whether Bobby was in there or not. And she was coiled around the eggs, 22 and a half to 23 hours a day, quite tightly. So I think it was the large majority of it was just her. And the nest box itself didn't have a huge opening to it. So I don't know how much, I have no idea how much her own respiration adds to the humidity level within the nest box, but I would imagine a little bit at least. So it seemed to be good enough anyway.
Yeah.
Right. The egg respiration also increases temperature and humidity and all sorts of things. So like towards the end of incubation, especially with artificial incubation, you need to open up that tub more frequently to allow air exchange, to allow some of the humidity or rather the moisture, the condensation to either be wiped out, or, you need to control for that so it's not dripping on the eggs.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as long as you have, a reasonable temperature and, water source close by, or even within the nest box. I've done it that way, where I put the water inside the nest box near where she's coiled around the eggs, so she can either drink, or that will also provide moisture to the environment. That's helped. Also, if you've got the hole to the nest box on the side rather than on the top, that retains the humidity a little better. I mean, Utah is one of the driest states in the US, and so my reptile room is typically lower than 20% humidity in the room.
Really?
Wow. I'm usually running an air conditioner during the summertime, and so it's even lower sometimes. But within the cages and within the nest boxes or their hide boxes, it can be substantially higher without much effort. So,
man, I don't know how you guys. I don't know how you do it out there in the West. It's
I like the dry heat. It's wonderful.
Oh.
Although my wife's hands kind of reconstitute when we go anywhere humid. She usually has some a little bit of dermatitis or whatever it is, and then you go out to the south or something, and she's, I feel much better. My hands are smooth.
Yeah, we went to Washington last summer. We were like probably 30 minutes away from Nick, and it was like 105 and like 13% humidity. It was just absolutely horrendous for people that are born and raised in Florida. Like that was just, oh man, we're basically like amphibians, like we were not doing well.
Yep. So, but when you're in an enclosed space, as long as you're taking that into consideration, and I think, a lot of I think about chameleons too, because, for forever it was said, oh, you got to have a screen cage for chameleons. Well, that's great if you're raising chameleons outdoors in Florida or something. Yeah, go for a screen cage. But if you're raising them in Utah, a screen cage is disastrous. They're going to have no humidity, your fogger or whatever is just going to dissipate really quick, and it's not going to give them the moisture levels they need. So that's kind of, again, you got to consider your own surroundings, where you're living. If you do have 100% in your reptile room, you may not need to worry so much. You could probably keep your stuff in screen enclosures and be just fine. But if you're living in Utah, you probably should have solid front opening enclosures without like a mesh lid or whatever, and without a heat lamp on top. A lot of times you hear about the beef jerky cages where you've got a light on top and a mesh, like a screen top with a light on it, and then you're just sapping out all the moisture in that cage and basically turning your snake into beef jerky. So I think it's not a one size fits all necessarily. You got to consider what state you live in, what the conditions are, and maybe get advice from somebody who lives in your state or who lives in a similar environment, or that kind of thing. So something to think about.
So once you end up with all these babies that hatched out, how did you house all of them, Abby? Were they individually housed or were they communally kept?
So we put them in communal enclosures until they had their first shed. With the first collection of retics with Stella's, we attempted to cohab them with the caveat of retics have a really high food drive. So if they all are gung-ho on their first meal, we need to helicopter them, make sure they're not trying to consume their siblings' meal from their bellies. So yeah, we put them straight into bioactives. First 2 per little 2x2 bioactive cube. And then after that first feeding, we're like, never mind. And we separated them out to their own. Luckily, the numbers, we had enough like bios for every single one of them to have their own little nursery suite. That's what we call them.
Wow.
But yeah, that's how they got started. The nurseries have little dividers. So as they grow and as like babies go off to new homes and stuff, and we have the space, we just take the divider out and they have a 4x2x2 bioactive. So it kind of streamlines the upgrades for babies that stay with us a little bit longer. But yeah, that was kind of our process. Yeah, it's been fun to see their behavior from like MI living the nest going into their own kind of, they have UV, they have the full spectrum like LED lighting and all of that stuff, and just watching their behaviors has been really fun to do in those environments.
How about you, Paul? How'd you set yours up after they left the nest and were ready to move out?
The first thing I did, I put all 14 of them in a single cage, which was madness. It was wild. I mean, I did it because they actually seemed to be pretty affiliative with each other. They liked, they would curl up together and snuggle up together, and it didn't seem to be a resource competition thing to the extent that I could, infer that. And then every night the camera, it would just like, it was a little snakelet rave, they were just like, woo, all the wiggly strings dancing around. It was great. It was really fun. But after a few weeks, when I got close to them being ready to eat, because scrubs take a while to eat, and they actually lost a fair amount of weight from their hatch weight to when they initially started eating, with almost every one of them. I separated them into 3 cages. So they were, there was 2 cages that each had 5 and 1 cage that had 4.
So right on. So what do you do, Justin? Do you like, how long do you keep them together, and then when do they go out, and are you using tubs and racks or cages? I mean, in my mind, I feel like tubs and racks are just so much more, just so easier, from, especially with, you're more into the breeding, so I can only imagine the numbers that you're dealing with on a seasonal basis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't produce huge numbers, but I mean, when you have 100 babies or something, you're not going to have,
That's
two
huge
by two
numbers.
cages in your reptile room. So yeah, it's mostly rack systems and tubs. And so, and even like, I think I didn't mention this with the previous question, but the setup with Antaresia babies, they hatch out really small, and so they can fit through cracks. And so you'd have to be pretty on top of it once they hatched out, because they could usually escape from the adult cages. There's enough gaps or whatever between, like sliding glass or whatever, that they could get out, or out between the tub, the gap, in a rack system or something. So, I had a few scare, kind of, oh crap, I got to hurry and get these out of here because they're all escaping out of the vent holes or whatever. So yeah, kind of like Paul was saying with his, the mesh is too big. They can get out of there. They're a lot smaller than the adults. But so yeah, I'll usually put all the babies in one tub of appropriate size, that they're not going to overrun it too much. And sometimes I'll split up the clutch, for like the carpets and things. I'm not going to put a clutch of 20 in a tub, but I'll split them out like males and females or something like that. But like the others have said, like they're usually in a group, at least until they shed. And so they'll usually just be balled up again, not resource dependent, but they'll just be balled up together wherever they're at. And they seem to persist that way until they shed, and then they start moving around. Now, I've had a few times where I've left them together too long, and Antaresia babies will try to eat each other, and that's not great, because it usually results in the death of the eater and the eatee. So that's just too big of a meal when you're eating something your same size. So the one who ate the sibling, even if they regurged it, they would usually die as well. So it's not great. So I've learned the hard way, get them out of there after, they shed their first time, and set them up individually. But I do think they at least until that first shed, probably in the wild too, that they stick together and kind of stay close to where they hatched, until they have that first shed, and can kind of head out from there. But,
Okay. All right, guys. Well, I think we hit most of the questions. I think, sometimes it would lead us into one question would lead us into another one. Also, I have a pretty bad thunderstorm coming through right now, and I'm kind of worried about a power outage. There's only so many battery backups I can buy.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, this has been really interesting. I still feel like I'm going to do artificial incubation, even though, like, I don't know, I'm just so terrified. My anxiety gets the best of me. But at the same time, I think that if I reproduce boas, maybe that'll change my perspective, where I'll just be more like, you know what? They do it, so why not let a python do it? And yeah. I guess the issue is just providing maybe a couple nest boxes before laying happens. Is that something that you guys would recommend? Like giving options across the gradient? Like if you have a 6-foot cage, have one in the middle and one on the hot side and one on the cooler end, and just let her figure out where she wants to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I'm curious, Adam, and this isn't like giving you crap for your decision. I'm just curious, like, is there something specific that you would be worried about happening or not happening, or is it just the general vibe of artificial incubation it's more controlled and seems less anxiety producing as a result, or?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. The other big thing is that I use heat lamps, and my ambient at night drops down to probably 72, 73 degrees. So I would definitely have to change. I mean, even with a gravid female, I'm going to have to change my setup to give her a warm spot overnight. I'm assuming that I wouldn't be able to allow her to go the entire night without any supplemental heat. So I would probably have to take that heat bulb out and put in a deep heat projector and run it on a herpstat.
No, not
I don't know.
necessarily. I mean, there's, they've done studies where they show adult pythons, like they'll coil and they'll retain heat. I know in that same interview, what was the name? The Boland's python breeder. He said that he tracked their temperature, and his room his ambient is set in the 70s, and so like his female Boland's would retain that 95-degree temperature all night long. And so until the basking lights came back on, and he had his basking lights on 12 to 12, and they would go bask, and then they would retain that heat all night long with the ambient of 70 degrees. So pythons are very good at maintaining those temperatures. And I know, diamond pythons do that too. They'll leave their clutch to go, heat up and then go back to the clutch and kind of transfer that heat that they've gained through basking to the clutch, and then keep it overnight. And you're going to get some variance, and that's okay. Like, I don't think it hurts eggs to drop down into the 70s for, a couple hours at night, versus getting too hot. I'd be more worried about the heat than the cool. It might just take a little longer for them to hatch out. So, I wouldn't let that dissuade you. Maybe don't shift full sail to just maternal incubation, but go ahead and try it and see what happens. It's just such a cool experience. And we also didn't mention shivering thermogenesis. Like, shiver to generate heat, and it's not all species. Like, usually the more temperate species, like a diamond python or a centralian python or something that comes from a very variable environment, can actually shiver their muscles and generate heat to up the clutch of the temp, I think up to 5 degrees or something. So they can definitely influence their temperatures that way. So depending on the species, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's all definitely stuff to take into consideration. I mean, it's going to terrify me no matter what, I guess, because I'm going to want those babies so bad, and not to sell them. Like, I don't plan on making any money off of snakes, but I'm just going to want to be able to say, like, yeah, those are little snakes that I provide an environment to help, facilitate their existence, rather than, I left them in there and now they're all dead, So that
can also happen in your incubator. So I wouldn't say you're out of the woods just because you artificially incubate either. Because, like I said, my black-headed python female, she had 6 eggs and only 1 made it out. So maybe if I would have left them with her, even that pancake coil would have done the job. Who knows? So,
Something I asked myself, Adam, when making those decisions is, with the information that I have, what is the best decision I can make that benefits the animal the most, regardless of my own human emotional reaction to it? Because yes, you're going to be more than likely freaking out and anxious if you go either route, right? So that's kind of the question I always run through my head when I'm like, ooh, do I do this or do I do that? Like, which direction do I go here? And that can help kind of inform that decision.
Yeah. And if you have a power outage, maybe your incubator doesn't come back normal, or like I had a heater malfunction in the room that I have my incubator in. Usually it's colder. That's why I put the incubator in there, because, if it gets too hot, then it's hard to cool down an incubator, you know. So, but the heater went on and stayed on, and I came back and the room was 105 degrees, so it messed up. The first clutch of the year, which was the black-headed pythons, of course, and so the babies hatched out with like very small eyes, like the ones that did hatch out. And surprisingly, I had a better hatch rate than I did on this better, incubated, and the female took better care of them, and I figured out some of the issues. But so, just because you're artificially incubating them doesn't guarantee success either. And it can also be anxiety inducing because you sit and watch eggs go bad, and you wonder, well, if I would have had them with the female, maybe she could have tightened her coils or loosened her coils, or, changed something to improve the outcome that, you couldn't see just by looking at them sitting on top of incubation medium. Maybe it was too wet or too dry, or, and the female can say, oh, it's too dry, I need to urinate in the incubation container to increase the humidity, or it's too wet, I'm going to loosen my coils so they dry out a little bit more. There's an extra decision making entity in there making hopefully better choices for the clutch than where they wouldn't have that option on their own. So, I think that's something maybe that could put your mind at ease a little more, that you have an extra helper in there making sure that the eggs succeed. So why not give her that chance?
Well, I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about this, Justin, but I have diamond pythons outside. I've got a freaking gorgeous male that I got, and I've got 2 females out there. And at first I was super sketched out about putting them outside. And then I actually got like really relaxed, because I'm like, man, nature is just doing what nature does, and the snakes are doing whatever they want to do around nature, Right. And I was worried, like, because like if you missed in an enclosure and you spray the snakes, usually they're like, ugh, what are you doing? But with the rain, they actually go out and cruise around, or they'll go and hang out on branches and try to, because it's cloudy, but you can tell that they're still getting some warmth, by being out and exposed and just laying out in the rain. And, obviously like perfect sheds and, all these different things that I really didn't anticipate. And, I don't know if I've talked about this yet. I know I talked about it on my Patreon, but the male he went and I fed him, and when he bit and wrapped the rat, I noticed underneath on his belly was red. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. He's gotten scale rot from being out here with all this rain that we're getting, and he's rotting from, like under his jaws all the way to his midsection. He's just rotting out. And I'm like, I know it's not a shed because, he just shed, and I'm literally freaking out, and I'm running inside and grabbing all this cork. And I'm like, I'm going to layer a cork parking garage essentially that he can dry out inside of, and I'm doing all this stuff. And all of a sudden I noticed that as he swallows the meal, that red coloration is following the lump down his body.
Yeah.
And I had never seen this before, but he's such a light colored diamond. Like he's this vibrant yellow, with like a white belly. And clearly it wasn't scale rot. And I remember I talked about this on my Discord, and Lisa was like, oh yeah, that, I see that in a couple of my snakes. And yeah, that's a common, thing, that flushing.
Yeah.
And when I posted that image of him eating, David Feinberg, who I got him from, was like, oh yeah, he flushes like crazy. And I'm like, yeah, now you tell me, like after my panic attack.
You're panicking already, Adam. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's my default state.
Yeah, and I think, as you experience these things and you do them and they work, then you're like less prone to it. So it's probably just anything new is going to induce that, but,
Yeah.
and I think as long as, considering being outside too, like diamond pythons know what to do when it gets cold, but you have to provide them with the means to, escape that cold if they need it. And so like, either a well insulated hide box or, something where they can, kind of wrap up and retain their heat until the sun comes out again, basically, because they're used to, it gets pretty cold in their environment. I've been, wanting a jacket when I've been out hiking in Sydney area, so it's not they're definitely a temperate python. So, but, and I'm sure like with a centralian python, it gets down to freezing where they're from. So they're not sitting out in the open, in the creek bed or anything. They're coiled up inside of a tree hollow or something or in a rock face where it's got some heat, giving off throughout the night or whatever. So as long as you can provide them with that escape from those extremes, then they're just fine. If you just had an open cage, bare bones, just like paper substrate or something, you might have a problem. But as long as you have somewhere for them to retreat, that's the key. That does, and it's enticing to me as well, but we get, a couple feet of snow in the winter and, and it gets up to 110 in the summer. So it can be a very variable, environment here in Utah. So
yeah. And I looked into it, and I'm almost the same distance from the equator in the northern hemisphere as Sydney is in the southern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
So our weather is very similar. I think we get wetter and a little hotter. And I'm just trying to give them the ability to escape the heat. So I have like cork hollows that go down into substrate.
Right.
So that way they can get away from it. So far it seems good, aside from the fact that they seem to always be hungry and they want to eat my face off anytime I go in there now.
I thought that was just normal diamond behavior.
Inside
might do that inside too.
Yeah, inside they seemed a little more dialed back, but it's like being out in that heat, man. They are ready to eat all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids are like, my kids go out there and they're like, oh, look, he wants to come out and play with us. And I'm like, no, he wants to eat your face.
Yeah. People with tame like croc monitors, if they take them out into the sun for a few minutes, that tame croc monitor is gone, it becomes a different animal. Even like my little Rankins dragons, I'd take them outside, and as soon as they had a little UV or something, they turned into natural and they're like beard, open and gaping their mouths and trying to ward me off with some attacks and stuff, and watching out for birds and hiding and, completely different behavior than when they're inside.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Yuki, said the same thing about his bearded dragon. He takes him outside and he kind of turns into a feral beast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One other question I did want to get to, I guess this will just be for Justin, because it's for AI versus MI, but have you noticed any like glaring differences between the babies, physically, behaviorally, or otherwise, MI versus AI?
Not really. I think that needs quantification. I don't think you can just look at them and say, oh, they did better, or they ate more, unless you're taking detailed records of, percentage of feeding success over refusal, or like size, or things like that. Now, there have been some studies that have shown that. And we also Nick had some offspring, and we measured like 30 that had been MI'd and 30 that had been AI'd, and we saw a difference in size between those animals. Now, is that just a reflection of, differences in the AI versus MI? Maybe it's a little too dry in the incubator or something. I'm sure Nick does a great job hatching out snakes, but those kind of things do play a role. And so I remember there was one study that showed there was no difference between MI, or there was a huge difference between MI and AI, and it turns out it was like at a farm in Africa, and their way that they would artificially incubate is they would just take the clutch away from the female and put it in a hole in the ground. And so it's like, I don't know if that's a great control, for artificial incubation, but that's the way they did it over there to hatch out the babies. And then they'd let the females kind of go on their way and recuperate to reproduce the next season or whatever. So, other than that data that we put in the book, there's a few like minor things that might be better off with MI compared to AI. So there definitely could be an advantage to maternal incubation. I don't want to overstate it, like, oh yes, it's always better, because depending on your MI and your AI conditions, there could be, it could be skewed one way or the other. So it depends, again, to some extent on the keeper, the environment, those kind of things, versus it's always better or it's always not better. That's kind of, I guess, the complexity of the issue, but there is some data to suggest that MI does provide some additional benefit to the offspring compared to AI.
Do you think that that if you are keeping in an incubator, that maybe temperature fluctuations will be something that will be incorporated as time goes on? Like, just thinking about the MI with the way that the temperatures go up and down. Do you think that, is there anybody that does do that, or does everybody keep at a steady, constant temperature?
Yeah, I think for the most part, everybody kind of, I know that I've heard of some things where they'll change the temperature during incubation. I know chondro breeders had a big push to like figure out how to better incubate their chondro eggs. And there was some indication that, I got to lower it during the last third of incubation. But, unless you're just breeding a couple clutches or one clutch a year in putting it in the incubator, you have, like right now I've got, my last clutch is hatching, but the first clutch is hatched in, a few months ago. So it's like, if I wanted to reduce the temperature for the first clutch laid, then it's going to, reduce the temperature during the first part of incubation for the last clutch laid. So it's, they're not all laid at the same time. So it's difficult to, unless you have, 10 different incubators and you can change all those incubators accordingly. That becomes difficult. So mostly I think it's just set temperature, set it and forget it. Obviously towards the end of incubation, if you're opening up, trying to check on the babies, you're opening the incubator, you're opening the egg container. So it's going to lower the temperature a little bit, at least for maybe an hour or two. So there is some fluctuation that way. You may be wiping out the condensation. You might take the incubation box out of the incubator to do certain things like, weigh the eggs or whatever you're doing with them, wipe down the extra condensation and stuff. So that could definitely play a role in that variability of temperature and humidity, but for the most part, they're pretty consistently incubated at one kind of temperature. I do have like, I think a 3 degree temperature swing programmed into my thermostat on the incubator. So they will go from like 88 to 85, kind of up and down. So the thermostat will kick on when they hit 85 and then it will turn off when they hit 88 or whatever. So they're typically around 87 or lower for the most part, but they do go a little higher. And again, like, it was kind of surprising that the eggs from the pygmy python clutch that I tracked with the temperature monitors got up, to the mid to high 90s, and they all were fine. They hatched out, had a, pretty much 100% success rate. Maybe a couple, didn't make it, but for the most part. And I thought, if you get them above 90, they're dead. But I think that's just like set at a constant 90 doesn't go well. You got to have them 88, 87, 86, somewhere on there. And they do a lot better with that consistent temperature. But if you're fluctuating, maybe 90s for an hour or two aren't that bad. And down to the 70s isn't a big deal either. So,
Okay. All right, guys. Does anybody have any final thoughts or anything that they want to put in or say?
No, I think I blabbed enough.
That's why we appreciate you, Justin. Well, thanks, Paul, again for wanting to do this, and kind of you basically you came up with the idea of inviting Abby and Justin, so and coming up with some good thoughtful questions, and
super fun.
and now you now you don't have to bother me about this anymore.
Oh yeah, I've got a long list of things to bother you about.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.